So welcome to Choosing Childcare. My name is Shira Davis, and I'm one of the clinicians with the Employee Assistance Program. And if you have any questions, again, type them into the chat. Everyone will be muted. I think to start us off, I want to be able to put a polling question out there. Have you already started your childcare search? So hopefully you see the poll up there. And if you can just plug in if you've already started your search at all, just a yes or no. Okay, so pretty mixed, and looks like almost a little more than half of you have. And some of you, I'm guessing, are in the beginning research stage here. And so hopefully this will be helpful. Today, what I really want to cover are the different types of care. And I think of this as three main different areas of childcare. I think of it in terms of in-home care, center-based care, and family home care. So we'll go through each one and pros and cons of each. And then I also want to talk about ways to look for each kind of care, as well as our lactation support services and specific MGB resources that employees have access to. And so to put another polling question out there, what kind of childcare are you interested in learning about most? And so even if you've started your search, I'm curious where you focused your efforts on. If you haven't started and maybe you really don't know where to begin, but if you do have some idea of what kind of care you already know might make sense for you and your family, it's always helpful information to know where the focus might be. All right, so really all over the map. Looks like a few more of you are interested in center-based care, but definitely all three. And some of you are not sure yet, which is absolutely fine. And so to talk about the first kind of care is in-home care. And this is when someone comes into your home to care for your child or children. So this might be a babysitter, a nanny, or an au pair. And there are absolutely advantages and disadvantages to this kind of setup, where I think some of the very clear advantages is that you have real flexibility of your schedule in terms of the hours that are set and the needs that you have specific to time and logistics for it. So you have a lot of control over that piece, which is really helpful, especially if you're not working a typical 8:30 to 5 or a schedule like that. It's also helpful if you have multiple young children in a home, right? Where then all the care is happening in one place that you're arranging with one other person. There's also no commuting, transportation. That can be a real time save, that when you leave the house is when you leave the house if you're going to work or remote, whatever your situation might be. Another piece that can be a real advantage is that when your children are not feeling well or they're sick, you still have care, you still have coverage. You don't have to worry about, keeping them home because that's already taken care of. And another advantage is that they're not exposed to germs of other children. And if you notice, that's also a disadvantage for many, is that they're not exposed to germs of other children. And so what we do know is that that can be really helpful in a point of comfort, but that also whenever they do enter, whether it is school-based or preschool or something like that, there can be, you might want to expect just a little bit more sniffles or anything like that as they start playing with others in a bigger group setting. To talk to the disadvantages, because I think these are important to mention, because you just want to know, I think before choosing, to really know what you're weighing ahead of time. And so yes, the flexibility is really helpful, but you're paying for it. You absolutely are. There is a real expense to having someone come into your home to care for your kids, and it's essentially one-on-one, and if there are more children, one-on-2, one-on-3 care, right? And so if you're using any kind of nanny service or au pair agency, there's often a pretty hefty placement fee for them. It can be upwards of $2,000 just for a placement fee. And there's usually an application fee as well, which can be $100 or $300. So not insignificant. And then even in terms of what pay might look like, for a live out provider, whether that's a nanny or babysitter, the hourly rates, they vary widely. It can be anywhere, I've seen as low as $15 to as high as $35 an hour. So really, it's all over the map in terms of what the pay rate might be. It also depends on how you end up finding the care provider, where if it's through an agency, it's usually a much more set, structured hourly rate. If it's someone that you've negotiated care with yourself, whether it is through a sittercity.com or care.com site or word of mouth, then you have a lot more leverage in terms of what you're able to negotiate for that rate. But just to give you a sense of that, the going rate really can be a pretty wide spectrum of what that could look like. For an au pair, some people might, if you have the space and if you're able to pay the agency fees and you're okay with someone living in your space, a live-in might be, let's say, $500 a week. But again, this number varies, but just to give you a sense of what you might be looking at. And so, again, in terms of the disadvantages, I would say one of the other ones here to mention is that, if your babysitter is ill, then you don't have coverage for that day. So that's always just the flip side of that. And when I see that someone asked a question around interviews, questions for nannies, and we do have a resource on that, which I'd be happy to circulate. And so I can definitely look to that, because there is a guide that's out there, and I'm sure the internet can be very helpful with this stuff. But in terms of, we do have resources not only on questions to ask a potential babysitter, but also center-based care and for family home care. I mean, you're interviewing any kind of care setting, and you will want to be able to make sure you have certain information ahead of time. I think to go to childcare centers. So this is what we would typically think about as a standalone facility, as a daycare center where you might see a Bright Horizons or an independent daycare or another chain of franchise. Every area is different for what they have and what they offer. But this, I think, is where you can envision dropping off your child at a certain time when the center opens after that time, and then you need to pick them up when they close, right? And then the beauty is that in some ways the mess is not in your home. And so however you left your home is how you left it. And someone else is caring for your child along with other children and other teachers as well. So some of the advantages here is that often the staff will have some level of education. In a daycare center, many will have some kind of early ed degree or working towards it. And staffing is typically worked out if there's any illness in terms of the teacher for that classroom that your child is in is ill that day. And so you don't have to worry about coverage. That's part of the beauty of the center will take care of that piece. And the daycare centers are usually built or adapted for children of specific ages. And so if they are serving, ages 0 to 5, or 0 to 6 is often the age range where they'll take, from infants. Sometimes it's as early as 6 weeks, sometimes it's 3 months. Every center is a little bit different in terms of what they require, but usually till around kindergarten age, sometimes including kindergarten age. And I think this is where you can imagine that every child has like a little cubby, a little space. That's where you put their things for the day, and they're in a room that's age appropriate for them. with other children within a certain age range that matches theirs as well. And some of the real advantages of center-based care is that it's often a built-in community for parents. It's how many parents will connect with other parents, make friends. Your child will make friends there. And especially if you end up staying there for a few years, it's a real nice way of just building a network and a connection with others who are in similar life stages potentially. And so I think just to highlight some of those advantages, it's a space that's really catered to kids. The activities are geared towards them. Sometimes food is included, especially once the children are older, usually at a year old. They might provide, let's say, milk and meals and snacks as well. So just some other added benefits of all of the care coming in from one place. Some of the disadvantages: flexibility with hours is usually pretty firmly set. And so there's not a lot of flexibility with it. If you're going to be late for picking up your kid, you usually have to let them know in advance, and there might be a late charge. There might be some fee, especially if it's, occurring more than once. And guidelines are usually pretty strict around this. And there are often many policies and guidelines that they're pretty firm about, especially around any illnesses. So if your child, even putting COVID aside, but in general, if your child has a runny nose, often they can't attend, or whatever it might be, it's usually a pretty strict guideline for ill children. And in terms of readiness for transitions, what I would say is often a delicate balance when your child is ready to move to another age group. So perhaps, they're ready to move from infant to toddler one. And sometimes there are limitations based on their space availability or requirements. And so you might think your child is ready, and there might not be a space in the next classroom. So I think just to be mindful that sometimes this goes really smoothly, and sometimes there's some parent advocacy that needs to be involved. And of course, the other piece here is that daycare centers are not cheap. The cost can be high. It's usually more expensive for infants, and then the rate typically goes down as they get a little bit older. So the toddler classrooms and then the preschool classrooms tend to be a little bit cheaper because the ratio for the caregiver to children changes and gets a little bit smaller. So that's something, a little bit bigger. And so that's something that, you can always take into consideration with it, that what you're paying will change over the course of time, but the costs are generally pretty significant for full-time care 5 days a week. To speak to family child care, this is typically a family-run daycare, often out of someone's home, where there are much fewer people who are, sometimes it's one provider, sometimes it's the owner provider and one or two other people. I know of a few which tend to be somewhat larger, but they're typically smaller run operations. And so because they're usually in someone's home, in smaller spaces, a lot fewer children will attend at the same time. And so some of the big advantages for using a family home care setting is that it's typically less costly. They're usually a lot less expensive than a larger center-based care. And of course, much less expensive than having a babysitter or nanny come to the home. And there's usually a little bit more flexibility with hours, because, and I would say again, with a caveat, for some, they try to be really consistent, but for many of them, you can see, if you have an exception one day and you really need to be at work much earlier, you can see if you can drop them off earlier, and often, they'll tell you if they can be amenable to it. So there is a little bit more built-in flexibility, especially around hours of operation and for some other needs that might come up as well. Some other advantages is that there might be openings throughout the year. Often with the larger center-based care, They might have wait lists. You might need to be in touch with them and reply when you're already pregnant with your child and they're not even born yet. With the family childcares, they usually don't maintain wait lists. There's not usually ones as long. If they have an opening, they have an opening and they're ready to start. So it can be a lot easier to sort of find placement with less lead time for the family childcare setting. Other advantages around, they're not usually as strict around the guidelines for illness, which that might be a little bit different with COVID, but putting that aside, generally, if the child has like a really mild sniffles or something, it's not a real cause for concern. Another advantage is that in terms of sort of the built-in community aspect, you won't have as many people to connect with, but it can feel a lot more intimate of a setting where you're able to really get to know the other families that might be attending, and even the providers themselves. There's a lot more interaction with them. And so that's just a nice add-on to it. Some disadvantages: the staff can have less training. They might not have any kind of formal education around it. If the provider is sick, there's usually not much backup coverage. And so unless they do have a few other people who they work with to run the operation, but especially if it's solo run or if it's just two providers, if one is out, it can really limit how many kids that they can have there that day. So again, it's a smaller social network. So, if it's a family home care that can have 6 children there, you'll have 5 other families to potentially connect with. Something else to consider with the family setting is that if there are issues that come up that need to be addressed or negotiated through, I think you're needing to address those directly with the care provider. And if for whatever reason you're not seeing eye to eye, there's not much recourse around it. And I'll say this in contrast to the center-based cares, where if there is some concern, you'll usually have the teachers, there's multiple in a classroom, and then there's the director, might be some or owner, or might be someone else that you can appeal to negotiate and figure out. And there's usually much more, I think, room in terms of trying to resolve any issue that might be at play. And so because with the family home care, it's just a smaller run operation, usually not a lot of people that you are needing to deal with for it. And so if there is an issue, it just can be harder to resolve it, depending how important it is and how significant. So just to put that out there. And so I want to be able to speak to the childcare search. So now that you have a sense of really the 3 different kinds of settings, as the search begins, I know this can be a very overwhelming piece to it, because if you really don't know where you're leaning, it can just feel like a wide open field, and it really is. The first website that I'm listing here is, I would, if you're not sure what you want to do, I mean, this is a great way of just seeing what's in your area. The state licenses all daycares, the center-based and the family home cares. All of them should be licensed, and they've updated their site recently to make it easier to search for licensed programs in any area. So you can pop in your zip code and see what comes up for you. And they'll list information, including type of care, location, ages of children that they serve, because some will serve, especially some of the family home daycares, they'll sometimes even be able to serve older children for after school programs. So you might see that they are doing 0 to 12. And just to help give you a sense that usually anyone who's above 5 is there after 3 o'clock or so after the school day. But it'll give you a sense of what ages of children that they serve, their capacity, inspection dates, if there's any ongoing investigations. And they might also post hours and fees. I would always double check that part, because that can always change, and I don't know when they collect that information, but some of them they've been able to collect a lot at some point whenever, and this update is made within the past few years that I've seen. So it's a really great resource to just have at your fingertips, because if you're doing an out-of-home option, you do want to double check that they're licensed and their licenses are up to date. And this is a great way to do it. But it also gives you other information. Often you'll see their website, how to contact them, and be able to connect, interview, see if they have any openings, especially if it's something that seems convenient and you might be interested in. In terms of the nanny service, there are many organizations that will assist parents in finding a nanny. Their services vary. They often do background checks, will have references, will do some training. They usually guarantee placement for a period of time. Again, costs vary greatly around this. So it could be, again, like the $500 or $600 a week for a live-in, and maybe the $15 to $30 an hour for a live out or more. The nanny searches, again, the placement fees, it can be a few $1,000s. What I want to highlight here is that often people have real success with the word of mouth, with tapping into a community. And so if you don't already have a community, there are some great ones that MGB already has built in for you. And so one is, maybe we'll send this out post-webinar so that you guys just have access to these websites. But I think there were two that I would recommend that are available to employees. One is that the Brigham has a nanny network that anyone with an MGB email, so system-wide, can sign up for it. And it's a great way of people posting recommendations or their needs. And it's just a wonderful exchange of information, specifically around babysitters, nannies, and other topics really regarding childcare piece. So that's a wonderful community that's pretty well established. It's a great site. Another newer one is the MGB Community Connect site, which I think has really gotten a lot more traction over the past year and a half. And this is where employees can post a big range of things. It's not childcare specific, people looking to commute with others to work, stuff like that. But a lot of childcare queries and recommendations get posted there. So it's not a bad place to put, especially if you're looking for a nanny share, which can be a great way of sharing the cost. If you have similar needs, similar schedules, maybe the children's ages make sense or are complementary for a provider to be able to manage both. But again, anyone can log on with their MGB details to view or post. And so I'll make sure that those sites get submitted as well. Another service, so I think in terms of there's a lot of stuff out there. And I would say if you know more specifically what you're looking for, of course, don't hesitate to reach out to the EAP at any time. We have collected a lot of these resources. And so even though we're not necessarily endorsing them, there is a lot of stuff out there. Even just to give you a sense in terms of the family childcare's Neighbor Schools is, if you can, it's neighborschools.com. Again, I can add it to the resource if that's helpful for people. But what they do is they help to place people with family daycares. And so I think there is a registration fee of about $100, but then it's really trying to match people up depending what your need is, what you're looking for, and has the advantages of the family home care stuff that might be really helpful. Someone's mentioning the screen share issue. If anyone else is not seeing it, please just write us into the chat. In terms of the, I think something else I want to mention just around the EAP, and I'll talk a little bit more about our services later on, but we absolutely can help with doing searches for childcare centers and family daycare searches in your community. We often have info on summer care, babysitting services, and again, like the other mothers groups and things like that. So if there's anything you're interested in, we of course want you to reach out. I want to be able to speak for a moment around lactation support services. So I'm going to put another polling question up. If you know how you're planning to feed your newborn, if you're okay answering that in terms of formula, breast milk, both, or you're just not sure, because you might not know what will end up happening. But I think we always want people to know. It's always a good opportunity for us to let you know what is available, because we have many rooms throughout the MGB system. And I see a bunch of you are not sure. Many are planning to do breast milk, planning to do both, or a combination of formula and milk. I think that's great that a lot of you are pretty open to the process, which will be helpful, because of course you don't necessarily know what will be successful with it, but always good to have a plan. So if you end up feeding your child breast milk and that's going well, and you're planning to continue once you are back on site after your maternity leave, definitely get in touch with us. I put the site up here within for the EAP website, where we have our Mother's Corner, and that is where you can be able to register to have access to specific rooms where you can pump. And so we always want to remind returning parents when they come back from the leave, not to expect that you'll have access on that first day. We really need you to register beforehand. Sometimes every room has a different way of getting in. It's not the same across the board. And so with some, you need swipe access, some there's a code, there's just different ways of accessing it. And so please let us know at least a few days beforehand, so all that can be spurred away, so you don't walk in on day one and say, oh gosh, I just don't have a place to be able to pump. And so all of the rooms vary slightly, but most include an electric breast pump that all you need to bring is the compatible tubing set. And depending on what makes sense for you and where you are, if you're at MGH or Brigham or one of the other entities, you just want to be able to look that up, get in touch with us so we can let you know what's in the room and what you would need. And I would say, along with what we have access to, there's a ton of resources. So there's a lot of even just lactation consultants that you can access, as well as really helpful websites that people often go to. That can be in terms of like milk expression or just common baby questions that we might all have as we are going through these transitions. And I see someone asked around the possibility of renaming Mother's Corner, and there actually is an initiative going on. I don't know where it stands right now, but yes, that name has been around for a long time, and I think they are looking at that. Okay, I want to be able to address some specific benefits that all Mass General Brigham employees have access to. And so MGB contracts with Bright Horizons to provide a lot of the childcare services. So right now, Bright Horizons operates all of our former MGB childcare centers, which include MGH's Children's Center, IHP's Children's Quarters, McLean's Childcare Center, and also the Children's Center at Assembly Row. And so that's all managed now by Bright Horizons. And these programs, they offer full day, year-round childcare for infant, toddler, and preschool age children of benefits eligible employees. So that's usually ages 0 to 5. They typically have long wait lists. You do have priority in the wait list for all Bright Horizons centers, but if that's something you're considering, you would definitely want to get in touch with them as soon as possible to see what those waits look like. In terms of backup care is something that I always want everyone to know about, because no matter what kind of care setting you end up organizing for your child, there likely will be a time where you'll want backup care. And this is a great benefit when your regular care provider is ill, or the center is closed that day, or school vacations, especially for older children. And so if using the MGH or Brigham backup care centers, because those are also around, if those are not convenient for you, It's a great way to use either a Bright Horizons backup center or an in-home care option as well. So in terms of the backup care benefit, you can bring your child to a center for backup care, or you can have someone come into the home. So it's open both ways. And right now, the benefit, which might change and has changed, especially over this past year and so, but right now, the benefit is that every employee has 20 days that are available for backup care. And that's those days, it's based on days used. And so you can have up to 3 children from the same family access a day of backup care. And in terms of cost, there is a cost. It's heavily subsidized by MGB, but those 20 days brings you from right now till the end of the calendar year, and then they will reset in terms of the next calendar year for what that would look like. If it stays at 20, I don't know. Our childcare department which is not EAP, is the one that sets that. So that's the part that can shift. And also the cost can shift. But right now, whether if you're using the MGH or the Brigham backup care centers, which that's 0 to 12 is what they cover. The tuition is generally $24 a day for one child or $45 a day for 2 or more children. And this is for employees who earn an annual salary of $75,000 or less. For anyone who earns more than that, you'll pay $48 a day for one child and $90 a day for 2 or more children. So just to give you a sense of what cost would look like for backup care through the Mass General and through the Brigham centers. For the Bright Horizons piece, it's based by, it can be based by hours. So for anyone making less than $75,000, it's $3 an hour. For anyone making more, it's $8 an hour. So again, this might change, but this stuff is all on Ask My HR, on the COVID FAQs for staff. And they try to be really good about keeping it clear and up to date. This way you have a sense of what you're looking at, what the cost might be. And so I absolutely encourage you to keep an eye on the Ask My HR. That's where a lot of that gets posted. And I'm just taking a look at some of the questions here. Okay, and maybe I'll address some of these later on. I think to move to some of the other supports, and you saw some of them on the other slide where there is academic support that's offered through Bright Horizons, as well as household support, including pet care, housekeeping, things like that. Those programs are not subsidized. I think the real advantage, though, is it's a way to help you search for providers or people to be able to offer those services. So some of the other programs for the family. So here it mentions about the backup care again, which is good to see. What I really want to point to here is Sitter City, where as an MGB employee, you have access to be able to have a free account with Sitter City. This will be incredibly helpful if you're looking for a full-time babysitter, or you're just looking for a babysitter at any time they need. It's a great way of establishing alternate care because you will need time for yourself outside of when you're at work as well. And so what's nice about it is that you can post what you're looking for and they'll do a free basic background check and things like that. And then what you're really doing is interviewing the candidate and negotiating a rate directly with the sitter. And so I think that's a really nice benefit that I'd like to make sure people know about. There are there's college nannies, which you'll see that they, through Bright Horizons, they offer a discount on the placement fee. So if you know you want to go the nannies route, there are, again, many different placement agencies for nannies, but here's one where you have a discount. There is, for summer, hopefully for everyone who's needed summer care at this point has squared away, but for next summer, Steve and Kate's camp is a great camp that there is a bit of a discount. And I would say it's one of the more affordable as well, but it's a day camp and 4 to 13 years. So, you know, this is really helpful once your kids are no longer in a younger childcare setting where there are school closures and you're worried about summer care. And then another piece, in case you're not only caring for younger ones, but perhaps for parents who might be living with you as well, that there is, through Bright Horizons, a resource for elder care. So just to keep that in mind. So in terms of the EAP, we can absolutely help with specific questions you might have around the child's care resources that are available, or if you need help managing a child's care search, we would absolutely encourage you to call us. But I think other things I just want to highlight is that we are a completely free service, confidential. We don't share information with anyone else unless we have your explicit permission to do so. We don't use Epic. There's no HR record maintained. It's a completely separate record keeping system that no one else outside of the EAP would have any access to. So we really care tremendously around confidentiality. It's a completely voluntary program. For who has access to it, so you have access to it, and so do your other family household members as well. You know, the idea is that if someone in the home is struggling, it's likely impacting everyone else too. And so we are all licensed mental health professionals, and we do have 24/7 crisis availability. And it does not have to be work-related, why you might be seeking care or support in any way. We are able to address a pretty wide range of concerns that anyone might have, whether it is the deeply personal, family-related, or if it is work-related as well. And of course, a lot of the concrete resources that might be helpful in terms of addressing maybe specific stressors that are at play. We know that the juggling act is very real, especially for caregivers in any way, and that work in of itself is very demanding, and life there's a lot of demands as well. And so finding the right resource can be very helpful, but also finding the support around it to be able to try to stay level, build resiliency skills, whatever it is that might be important. And we recognize and acknowledge that this is a pretty tough time anyways. And so please reach out. I do want to point you to our website though, because first of all, it has whatever language you might be comfortable in. It offers a pretty big variety of languages, but you can reach out to us through the website to make an appointment. We also have a lot of our resources that we will post directly on here. So you'll see the caregiving and family icon here, and it has a lot of the resources. You can find the Mother's Corner stuff on here as well. So just a pretty good place to go to if you're not sure and want to be able to just see what else might be available to you. And we also have the links on there to the specific MGB benefits that all employees have, which we will link to the ASMA HR section that gets continually updated. This way, you don't have to worry about finding it. If you just want to land on our site, it might be an easy way to do it. And then of course, it's a great way of seeing what other webinars we offer. And we try to record everything as best as we can, because we recognize date and time might be a little bit hard for people to commit to. In terms of, oops, I didn't mean to there. In terms of, other webinars that are coming up, I think I just want to let people know about two that we have that are being offered by childbirth and lactation educators within our system. So there's, for those of you who are hoping to breastfeed, there's getting off to a good start, breastfeeding your baby on September 8th. And then sort of the part 2 follow-up to that is working and breastfeeding. So a lot about what expected and nursing employees learn about maintaining breastfeeding when returning from leave. So it can be really helpful information. These are the nurses and lactation educators who are doing it day in and day out and have a ton of knowledge around it. And you don't have to have your child at, an MGB hospital to have access to them or this. So anyone is welcome to join. And of course, we don't want anyone to ever worry alone. And so please reach out if there is anything that you're concerned about or would be helpful to have some support. So I'm just going to go back to the chat and the Q&A to see what might be helpful here. Okay, so the Bright Horizon discounts, I see there's a question there. In terms of clarification, what I would say is, those, even that big graph that I have, if you go on the FAQs in the Ask My HR portal, it has it all mapped out, and it's probably a lot easier to see it in print. This way you can see exactly what the cost is specifically for the backup care. For the discount in terms of the 10% on the provider network versus the centers, what that's really referring to is that for Bright Horizons specifically, they have other centers that they've partnered with. And so if you use those centers, there is a discount. So much is based on where you are in the area. And so you would really want to connect with them to see what's available to you. Something else that I want to mention around this is that depending which entity you sit with, so if you're an MGH employee, there are sometimes perks that are listed. And so I know that with Childcare, which has a location that's right near the MGH site, there is, or pretty close, I believe it's in Charlestown actually, but they offer a 10% discount for employees. So you can also look on the perks for the entity that you're attached to see if they have anything else that maybe the hospital itself has negotiated for some childcare centers. They're usually about 10% discounts, but it's always good to see what they are. Okay. In terms of, again, the subsidy questions for backup care, and so whether it's so yes, the backup care, it's all subsidized, because if you were looking to have your child go to a center-based care for one day, you would likely be paying much more than $45 for the day. And in terms of whether it's the discounts are available for part-time employees, or I don't believe that's an issue. I believe as long as you are a fully benefited employee, that's all they're looking at. And so as long as you have met the threshold to have your other benefits through your MGB, then you're eligible for the MGB benefits, for the childcare benefits. And I see there's a question on if both parents work for MGB and one makes more and one makes less than $75,000. That's actually a good question. I would need to double check with the childcare department in terms of if they consider both or just consider one. So maybe to follow up around that. And yes, the recordings on the webinar are all posted on our website on the webinar section. And so we have a bunch that we've had this year around parenting, concerns related to childcare parenting, things like that, as well as many other wellness webinars. And we try to keep the recordings posted for at least a year afterwards. And so please look through if there's anything that would be helpful. Some things we try to keep much shorter than others, especially around even just ways of trying to find a moment to reduce your own stress level, whether it is yoga at your desk or doing a stress seminar or things like that. All of that is there. Okay, in terms of, see, a question has come in around cost being a factor, of course, for child's care. And so if your income is incredibly limited and you are making with whatever you're making likely would not be enough to cover. I mean, one thing to do, there are childcare vouchers that the state offers, and depending on what your income level is, you might qualify for a state-based voucher. And so again, if you need information for this, you can reach out to us directly for it. You might also easily find it online, but I think for specific questions to your situations, please don't hesitate to reach out to us around that. Because there are some options that are available that are state-based, and so especially around income eligibility for things like that, like childcare vouchers. Okay, thank you all so much for attending. I'm going to stop the recording now, but I'm happy to stick around for another few minutes for more questions that come in. So feel free to keep those coming.